The air was thick with tension that morning, the kind that seeps into the walls and lingers long after the shouting stops. The white colonial home on Crestview Drive looked calm from the outside. Trimmed hedges, flagstone driveway, and a silver Mercedes parked by the steps. But inside, the silence was deceptive. The twin brothers had once been inseparable, their bond the kind that only time could fracture. But on that cold March morning in 2019, one of them would never walk out alive. Neighbors would later recall how strange it was to see both of the Miller twins together again. They hadn't spoken in years. For most of their adult lives, Daniel and David Miller lived in opposite corners of the country, running the family's chain of small real estate firms their late father built from the ground up. The old man had been a legend in their small Illinois town, sharp, disciplined, and proud of the fortune he'd earned. When he died in 2016, he left behind an estate worth over $5 million, and the instructions that it be divided equally between his sons. But equality, as it turned out, meant nothing to men who'd built their lives competing with each other. Daniel was the older twin by 6 minutes. Responsible, reserved, the kind of man who measured his worth by what he could control. David, on the other hand, was the risk-taker, charming, impulsive, and reckless with money. By the time their father's will was read, David had already burned through his savings chasing bad investments. And when he learned that Daniel had been quietly managing parts of the family business, resentment began to fester like an open wound. It was supposed to be a reconciliation meeting, a chance to settle old disputes. That's what Daniel's wife Claire believed when she brewed coffee that morning and set 2 cups on the counter. Maybe this time they'll talk things through, she told a friend the night before. She had no idea that the conversation her husband was about to have would end in blood. The lawyer's office was silent except for the sound of paper sliding across the mahogany desk. No one spoke. No one moved. But in that moment, everything they believed about their family was about to be exposed. Before we unravel what truly happened behind closed doors, take a moment to tell us, where are you watching from tonight? And as the truth unfolds, ask yourself, was this driven by greed, jealousy, or something far darker hiding within family ties? The Millers weren't strangers to secrets. For decades, they'd worn the mask of the perfect American family, the kind that appeared at Sunday services in matching suits, smiling for photographs that told half the truth. But behind the polished smiles lay a long history of rivalry. Even as children, Daniel and David competed for their father's approval. Who could finish their chores faster? Who could score higher on exams? Who could win the old man's praise? Their mother, a quiet school teacher named Evelyn, used to call it the mirror curse. She once told a neighbor, "They're reflections of each other. That's what makes it dangerous. One can't stand to see the other succeed." When Evelyn passed from cancer in 2012, something in the family fractured. Their father, Charles Miller, grew bitter and controlling. He placed Daniel in charge of the company accounts, claiming David lacked discipline. It was the first real cut between them. By the time Charles died, Daniel had quietly ensured the business was secure. But David saw that as betrayal. He believed his brother had stolen his inheritance before the will was even read. According to friends, David's drinking worsened. He moved from Los Angeles to Peoria, Illinois, renting a small apartment and surviving on odd consulting jobs. But in early 2019, when an attorney reached out with documents requiring both brothers' signatures to release the remaining estate funds, David saw an opportunity, not just for money, but for revenge. Reports suggest he arrived at Daniel's house on March 8th, shortly after 9 a.m. A neighbor, Mrs. Reynolds, later told detectives she saw David standing on the porch for several minutes before ringing the bell. He looked nervous, she said, like he was rehearsing something. Inside, Daniel greeted him stiffly, offering coffee and trying to make small talk. Claire kissed her husband goodbye and left for work, unaware that it would be the last time she saw him alive. The brothers sat at the kitchen table for nearly 2 hours. Documents were spread across the counter, deeds, contracts, tax records. But witnesses say their conversation turned personal fast. In a dramatized quote from the case file, Daniel reportedly said, "You always thought Dad loved me more. He didn't. He just knew I'd protect what he built." David's alleged response, "Protect it? You locked me out." By 11:42 a.m., the security camera across the street recorded David storming out of the house, only to return 10 minutes later carrying a brown duffel bag. What happened next would later be pieced together through forensic reconstruction and chilling silence. When Claire returned home that evening, the lights were still on. Daniel's car sat in the driveway, but the house was eerily quiet. She called his name. No answer. Upstairs, the bedroom door was ajar. Inside, she found the family safe open, papers scattered across the carpet, and near the doorway, a faint trail of blood leading toward the basement. The next morning, police arrived. The report described a scene consistent with a domestic altercation. Daniel's body was discovered near the basement stairs. No sign of forced entry, no weapon recovered. His watch and phone were missing. Investigators quickly ruled out burglary. The only fingerprints on the safe belonged to David. In the days that followed, the story exploded across local media. Twin brother found dead in five-element estate feud. One headline read, "Reporters camped outside the Miller home, digging for any hint of motive." And as the investigation deepened, what they found began to tear apart the family's legacy. Detective Laura Henley, who led the case, told reporters, "We weren't just investigating a homicide. We were untangling decades of resentment." She described how financial records revealed secret transfers from the estate's trust, small withdrawals that began shortly after their father's death, all authorized by David. But Daniel had recently discovered them, and according to the documents, was preparing to confront his brother legally. The meeting that morning wasn't reconciliation. It was confrontation. In one of the search warrants, detectives found a chilling piece of evidence, an unsigned letter drafted on Daniel's laptop, time-stamped the night before the murder. It read, "If something happens to me, look at David. He's angry, desperate, and I fear what he might do." That single line would become the backbone of the prosecution's case. David Miller was arrested 3 weeks later in Los Angeles, where he had fled after selling his car and withdrawing nearly $40,000 in cash. When police caught him outside a motel near Santa Monica Boulevard, he reportedly told officers, "You don't understand. It was supposed to be me. He took everything." But what investigators uncovered next made the case far more complex than anyone expected. Forensic analysis of Daniel's phone revealed multiple deleted messages, all from the night before his death. They were between him and a number listed as Dad's attorney. The messages referenced an amended will, something no one in the family had ever heard of. According to digital records, that document would have shifted the balance of inheritance completely in David's favor. The problem was no such amendment was ever found. Detectives began to suspect that the brothers had both been manipulated, possibly by someone who stood to gain from their downfall. Rumors swirled about a former business associate, a woman named Carol Devine, who had once worked for their father's firm and allegedly had access to financial records. She vanished days after Daniel's death. But as the story twisted deeper into betrayal and suspicion, one truth became clear. The family's empire had been built on secrets, and now those secrets were being exposed one by one. Court proceedings revealed that the 5M estate wasn't just money, it was land, offshore holdings, and insurance policies written in complex trusts. For years, both brothers believed they were protecting their legacy. In reality, they were pawns in a web of deceit woven by the very people they trusted to preserve it. When David sat in the interrogation room, he didn't deny being at the house. He didn't even deny arguing. But when asked if he killed his brother, he simply said, "You think I'd destroy the only person who ever knew me?" He destroyed himself. Detective Henley later called that statement the most chilling moment of her career. And yet the evidence, while circumstantial, was damning. The duffel bag captured on camera was found in a dumpster behind his motel, stained with Daniel's blood. Inside were the missing documents from the safe and a single family photograph, torn in half. Still, the defense argued there was more to the story, that perhaps Daniel's death wasn't the result of rage, but of panic, or even a third party who used the brothers' feud as cover. The jury would have to decide not just who was guilty, but who had truly been betrayed. The courtroom was silent when the verdict was read. The Miller family name, once synonymous with success and discipline, now echoed through whispers of betrayal. Cameras flashed, pens scratched against notepads, and in the middle of it all sat David Miller, expression blank, eyes distant, as if he'd already accepted that his life had ended long before the judge's gavel fell. But to understand the weight of that moment, we have to rewind to the weeks after Daniel's death, when detectives began unraveling what really happened inside that pristine suburban home. Detective Henley and her team went line by line through the Miller estate files, tracing money transfers, property deeds, and the supposed amended will that never surfaced. What they discovered was a financial labyrinth. Someone had forged signatures, rerouted funds, and created shell accounts in both brothers' names. The deeper they looked, the more they realized this wasn't just a family feud. It was a manipulation that turned two brothers into enemies. A breakthrough came when digital forensics analysts recovered fragments of deleted emails from Daniel's laptop. They were traced to a secure server registered under a consulting firm once owned by Carol Devine, the same woman who vanished days after the murder. One email dated 3 months before Daniel's death carried the subject line, "The amendment is ready." The attached document, partially corrupted, outlined a version of the father's will that funneled nearly 70% of assets to David. But something about the text didn't align. The signature block bore a forged date. The notary seal was digitally altered. In other words, it was a trap. According to investigators, Carol had allegedly approached David earlier that year with the discovery of the amendment, claiming Daniel had hidden it to keep him out of the inheritance. Enraged, David believed her. He contacted Daniel and demanded a meeting. That meeting, the one meant to clear the air, was, in truth, the final act in a setup that neither brother saw coming. Witnesses from Carol's former office later testified that she disappeared after transferring a large sum of money into a Cayman account. No one ever found her. To this day, her whereabouts remain unknown. But her digital fingerprints left behind in the Miller family files told a story of greed that metastasized through generations. When prosecutors presented this evidence in court, it painted a devastating picture. A family consumed by distrust, manipulated by someone who knew exactly which wounds to reopen. But despite these revelations, one question still burned. Did David intend to kill his brother, or did rage and confusion turn confrontation into tragedy? The jury deliberated for 3 days. They listened to hours of recorded testimony, forensic presentations, and emotional pleas. Claire Miller, pale and trembling, told the court they loved each other once. They just forgot how to forgive. In the end, the jury found David Miller guilty of second-degree murder and fraud. The judge sentenced him to 32 years in state prison. Reporters described the verdict as a hollow victory. Justice was served, perhaps, but no one walked away whole. After the sentencing, Detective Henley spoke to local press outside the courthouse. Her voice was measured, weary. "This case wasn't about money," she said. "It was about what happens when truth is buried beneath pride." One secret led to another until the entire family collapsed. Inside the courtroom, Claire sat alone long after everyone had gone. On the desk beside her lay a small stack of documents, the remnants of a fortune that no longer meant anything. She told a journalist later, "I thought I married into a strong family. What I didn't see was that strength without empathy turns into control, and control turns to destruction." For months after the trial, letters between the brothers were released to the public as part of court filings. One in particular, written by Daniel a year before his death, struck a chord with readers nationwide. For one, it read, "I don't want the money, I just want my brother back. But I fear that by the time we understand each other again, it'll be too late." And it was. The Miller estate, once valued at over $5 million, was dismantled. Properties were sold to cover legal fees and restitution. The family home, the scene of the crime, stood empty for years, its windows boarded, its garden overgrown. Locals began calling it the Mirror House, a haunting nod to the twins who reflected each other's flaws until it destroyed them both. In 2021, a documentary crew visited the property for a follow-up special. What they found was unsettling. The basement door, sealed after forensic cleanup, still bore faint marks from evidence tape. The air smelled of mildew and dust. In a forgotten drawer, the crew discovered an old family photograph, the twins as children, standing beside their father. On the back, written in faded ink, were the words, "Don't let pride separate what love built." The image became the closing frame of the documentary, a reminder of what was lost when the pursuit of control eclipsed compassion. But the story didn't end there. 2 years into David's prison sentence, a letter arrived at the Peoria County Prosecutor's Office. It was postmarked from Mexico and contained a single page typed on an old machine. There was no signature. The message read, "You punished the wrong person. I took what was mine." Attached was a photocopy of a bank statement showing a transfer of $1.2 million from one of the hidden Miller accounts to an offshore fund linked to Carol Devine. The letter reignited media attention. Some believed it was a hoax. Others thought Carol was still alive, watching from afar as the family destroyed itself. But without verifiable evidence, the case remained officially closed. Detective Henley, now retired, reflected on the mystery during a 2023 interview. She said, "Every case leaves ghosts. The Miller case left two, the brother who died and the brother who still can't admit he was manipulated. I don't think we'll ever know the full truth." For Claire, closure never came. She moved away quietly, selling what was left of the estate and donating part of the proceeds to a charity for families affected by domestic loss. When asked why she chose that cause, she replied, "Because sometimes the real victims aren't the dead. They're the ones who have to live with what was exposed." To this day, the story of the Miller twins serves as a haunting reminder of how fragile loyalty can be. Greed may start with money, but it ends with something deeper: the need to control how we're remembered. And for families like the Millers, reputation was everything, until the truth shattered it. In an archived interview recorded years earlier, their father once said, "A legacy is only safe when your children trust each other." Those words, replayed over footage of the abandoned Miller home, echoed like a warning. Trust, once broken, can't be repaired with apologies or inheritance. The twins had shared the same face, the same blood, the same childhood laughter. Yet in the end, one chose pride and the other paid the price. Their tragedy wasn't born overnight. It was built slowly, through envy, silence, and the belief that love could survive secrets. But secrets, when left to rot, always find a way to be exposed. And perhaps that's what makes this story linger long after the cameras stop rolling. Not the crime, not the trial, but the mirror it holds up to every family that hides its fractures behind polite smiles. Because in the end, the Millers weren't monsters. They were human. And humanity, when tested by greed and grief, can become its own worst enemy. Sometimes the darkest betrayals aren't written in wills or contracts. They're written in silence, the kind that settles between brothers who once promised to protect each other until the day one of them couldn't tell where love ended and envy began. Sometimes the darkest secrets are the ones we keep from the people we love. And in this case, the truth was exposed, but the damage was already done. Do you believe David truly meant to kill his brother? Or was he just another pawn in someone else's game? Share your thoughts below. And if stories like this make you question what loyalty really means, stay with us. Because the world is filled with families who hide behind walls of money and pride, waiting for their darkest truths to be exposed.